And we're back with Invincible's 4th episode of the season, and honestly, this sort of felt more like 2 mini episodes sewn together. Not complaining though, because those mini episodes were pretty sick. One of them showing us an insane authoritarian future for Earth, while also forcing Mark to face his own ideals and possible future, and the other giving us the most Alan/Nolan action we've gotten in a while in a really fun prison break. So spoilers for the episode You Were My Hero ahead, and I also just want to ask nicely, please don't spoil future comic events in the comments. I personally am reading the correlating comics after each season releases, and many others are just experiencing it through the show. So please just be cool about it. All right, let's get going. One thing I didn't mention in my 3-episode premiere breakdown was this little budding romance between Rex and Ray, which I kinda love. They opened up to each other about their weird childhoods a bit in the old Teen Team base, and this episode opens on them grocery shopping together, a fun scene that highlights their differences pretty comedically. I'm eager to see where this goes because they're honestly a pretty fun couple, but the initial focus of the episode is Mark trying to figure out where the hell this drone came from, garnering no answers from Robot except that it's from Earth and that it's expensive. As you might expect, based on where their relationship is at, Mark blames Cecil and confronts him. Obviously, we know it isn't Cecil, but Mark just going berserk at the GDA HQ is a pretty strong indicator of where they're at in their professional relationship right now. And Cecil reveals something to Mark that we already knew.
If we wanted to spy on you, you'd never know it.
Obviously, we've seen that Cecil is fully monitoring Mark and his family, and it honestly seems like Mark should also know this already. But I get the sense that Mark is maybe hoping that this drone was Cecil spying on them, because the fact that it isn't means somebody else knows his identity and family secrets. But this is all sort of a quick follow-up to the events of the end of 303, and the episode fully shifts gears here, offering up some really fascinating lore and some deep ethical questions that challenge Mark's current worldview. Mark's date with Eve is immediately interrupted by those two homies that stole the Declaration of Independence in the first episode of the season. Turns out they're from the future, and they beg Mark to come help overthrow their tyrannical king. So in my last breakdown, a lot of people seemed to think I was being too harsh on Mark, or even outright saying he was wrong in most of his decision making, but that's not really what I was saying. While I don't agree with every decision Mark has made, I do fully understand how and why he's making them. I was really just pointing out the drama and conflict that is stemming from his trajectory as a character this season, how the traumatizing events of the first 2 seasons have really shifted his attitude, and how that attitude seems to be a far cry from the Mark we saw in the first 2 seasons. Obviously, characters change and evolve, but I think it's pretty clear that Mark is going through a bit of an angsty phase where he's sort of overcorrected from his previous attitude. No, I wasn't saying that Multipol didn't deserve to go to jail. I was saying that the way in which Mark dealt with the conflict was far less empathetic than we're used to seeing from Mark. And I think that's a clear, intentional through line so far in this season. Previously, Mark would go far out of his way to help people who he felt needed them, like Titan in season 1. This year, Mark is a little harsher in his judgments of who deserves help, and this is a perfect example of this. Mark refuses to help these guys overthrow a full-on dictator.
You're lucky we're on a date, or I'd be taking you both to prison.
Seems like Mark really loves throwing people in prison this season, but he has so much on his shoulders this year, and it's clearly weighing on him heavily, which seems to be leading to his harsher, no-nonsense attitude. But even Eve could tell that this was an out-of-character decision for Mark based on her reaction here.
Are you sure about this?
Yeah, I'm not ruining our date just because...
And of course, once he's taken to the future and is given the full scope of the tyranny that's befallen Earth, Mark does help. At his core, Mark is still a good person who is trying to do the right thing. It's the weight of expectations on him, as well as the drama of his own personal life, that are causing him to act a little more super cop and a little less let's help people. But what I love about Mark's story in this episode is that the issue at hand is hitting him on multiple fronts. He's not only being forced to reconcile with aspects of his own future in multiple ways, but he's also being directly confronted with a dilemma that is challenging the good and bad ideology that he's been very strict about this season. And that all comes alongside the reveal of how this calamitous future came to be and who this tyrannical king actually is. The twins inform Mark that this ruler was put in charge when Earth was on the brink of collapse, and he was a good king for a while, but he eventually became this authoritarian dictator. This world has curfew 100% of the time, people can only go out to the work camps or to attend executions. absolutely brutal stuff. Everything about this world and how the people in it are treated is abhorrent, which makes the reveal that this deranged ruler is none other than the Immortal that much more shocking to Mark. So like I said, there are so many angles from which this little side quest challenges Mark's worldview. For one, he has to actually reconcile with aspects of his own future. He learns that he himself was the one who put Immortal in charge of the planet before abandoning Earth himself with his family. There are also some hints towards some other issues Mark might be dealing with in the future.
Have you been sick again? I thought they found a cure for you.
This isn't about me.
But another thing that really hits Mark is the fact that in the time period that he just left, Immortal and Kate had just gotten engaged, and here in the future, Immortal can't even remember Kate.
I've outlived everyone I've ever loved. Do you know what that does to a man?
It really doesn't seem like Mark has thought too intently about the reality of his extended lifespan. Obviously, Nolan tried to really get this idea through his head in season 1, but I don't think Mark has reconciled with it in any meaningful way. It seems like this reaction is him being confronted with this fact head on for one of the first times.
No, but
I think this likely hits even harder because Mark literally came to the future from a date with Eve. And that's also just where he wants to be in this moment. A pretty heavy realization that at some point, he might not even remember Eve. But Immortal's dilemma here is even heavier. He reveals that the only reason he began reigning with an iron fist was because he couldn't take the mental strain of being in this role for centuries. And he was desperately trying to lure Mark back to Earth to relieve him of his duty and to kill him. This is the exact kind of moral dilemma to deeply challenge Mark at this point in his journey. Faced with the reality that in order to save the planet, he will have to kill a man he has respected for his entire life, something he absolutely does not want to do.
You will kill me, whether you want to or not.
Forcing Mark to make a personal choice that is contrary to his personal belief system for the betterment of the planet, oof. He's been preaching all season about how he doesn't kill, about how killing is the line he won't cross. He's lamented the time that he did cross it with Levy, albeit accidentally. It's a great personal dilemma for the character, and though he literally saved the planet by going through with it, he does not feel good about it.
don't thank me. Please don't thank me for that.
And I think beyond the surface here, Mark is maybe being forced to reevaluate some of those staunchly held values he has insisted upon throughout this season. Earlier in the season, he went off on Cecil for utilizing Sinclair and Darkwing despite the way they've hurt and killed people. But now he's looking at the same issue in reverse. Darkwing was a character who made horrible mistakes and has since begun saving more people in an attempt to make up for it, something Mark takes exception to in the first episode of the season. Immortal is a character who spent centuries helping and saving people, only to spiral out of control into this deranged dictator. Knowing all of the good that Immortal did and all the things he did to help the world made stopping him a deeply difficult thing for Mark to have to do, even though he did much worse things than Darkwing on a much more massive scale. It's so fascinating how such a similar dilemma presented a bit differently can make Mark so unsure of his ideals.
He hurt a lot of people.
Yeah, I know. But he saved a lot of people too.
This is a great show. Even smaller aspects of this story sort of challenge some of Mark's perceptions. The only reason these dudes stole the Declaration of Independence in the first place was because of a rumor that the ink was the only thing that could kill their deranged ruler. Is it okay to steal if doing so will literally end a murderous dictatorship? This show is just so eager to dive into those quandaries, and it's one of the things I really love about it. And for Mark to be confronted with these things that challenge his ideas of what's right, alongside some of the scarier possibilities coming up in his own future, I think makes what he does next all the more impactful. He just talks with Eve, a person who helps him center himself to a place where he can be confident in who he is deep down. There's this great moment where Eve assures Mark that she'll get his ass in line if he ever strays down that tyrannical path on one condition.
If you promise to do the same for me.
You'd never do something like
This little script flip was such a simple but effective way for Mark to realize that, of course, he would never intentionally become that person. It's important to believe in who you are. And while I do still think that the relationship is kinda not getting the time it deserves within the show and things are moving a little fast, I really enjoyed this little date montage after this. Even if it did feel like it needed to use an excessive amount of season 1 and 2 Mark/Eve moments to make us feel like this relationship has been built up properly, but despite my misgivings, I think it all works really well. It's a lovely sequence, and after another heavy and traumatic event, it allows Mark to live in the moment and get back to a place where he can feel like himself. And even though they literally call out that saying I love you is way too soon for them, it still basically worked for me. pretty great sequence. Gotta say, I do think it's very funny the way they've transitioned over to Alan stories 2 separate times now by having Paul F. Tompkins pipe in with some narration right before Mark pipes down. Weird, but funny. And we always love a Paul F. Tompkins cameo. What is this? A crossover episode, etc. But the half of the episode that focuses on Alan and Nolan is pretty damn great and gave me one of my favorite Nolan moments in the entire series. We've seen a little bit of Alan and Nolan across the season so far, mostly indicating that, though he could escape, Alan refuses to leave without Nolan, also revealing that he's much stronger than the Vitrulmites expected. But here in this little half episode, Alan gets his chance as Nolan is finally taken in for his execution.
Goodbye, my friend.
Finally.
This entire part of the episode is mostly just solid action. Alan taking out guards, trying to get to Nolan, even recruiting Battle Beast in a pretty comical sequence. I do appreciate that Battle Beast doesn't really care about the escape. He just wants a good challenge, a good fight. He wants to fight some Vitrulmites. But outside of the great action and fun prison break, the real meat and potatoes of this story is all Nolan focused. Obviously, since the events of the season 1 finale, Nolan has been changing. We saw it on Thraxa with his new family and his genuine desire to protect the planet from the Vitrulmites, and we've seen him slowly start to reconcile with how he's changed while in prison. He was so indoctrinated with Vitrulmite supremacy rhetoric, and as he started to feel more empathy for other people and regret for the crimes he's committed, he's starting to understand that he does feel genuine love for people. For Mark, Oliver, Debbie, and Andressa, I always loved the shock in his own voice when he admitted this.
I think I miss my wife.
To me, the absolute highlight of this entire prison break is the interactions between the 2 Vitrulmite executioners and Nolan. Nolan has accepted his fate, believing that he deserves to die, not for betraying Viltrum, but for the horrendous damage he's caused and allowed on Earth and on Thraxa. But the executioners ask him if his betrayal was worth it, and he affirms that it absolutely was.
And I'm sad you'll never understand.
We also get this great moment where it looks like Alan is about to be killed and Nolan summons the strength to protect him, once again showcasing how Nolan has changed, feeling genuine empathy for other people. It again seems like it shocks even himself.
No Vitrulmite would do such a thing for another.
You would.
This is the highlight on the personal development side at least, because there's also a huge piece of lore revealed that truly changes everything. Nolan reveals that the Vitrulmite reinforcements will not be coming after them despite the prison break.
There are fewer than 50 pure-blooded Vitrulmites left in the universe.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Obviously, one of the biggest, most important revelations in the entire series, and maybe the first twinge of hope anyone has managed to feel that Earth isn't completely doomed. While upwards of 50 Vitrulmites does still sound like a terrifying threat, it's a far cry from what we would have expected from a galactic empire. I personally love the development because while it does bring a little bit of hope, it doesn't in any way make it feel like Earth is safe now, because we've seen what even a single Vitrulmite can do. But now, suddenly, there are a few people that can actually go toe-to-toe with Vitrulmites that seemingly intend on protecting Earth. Mark, Nolan, Alan, maybe even Oliver, not to mention the collective superhero community on Earth that, while not as strong as Vitrulmites, may have the benefit of numbers. But what I love most about this development is that through Nolan, it's going to challenge Mark in the exact same ways we've been seeing so far this season. It's a really huge revelation to go alongside his immortal dilemma from earlier in this episode. Nolan has done absolutely unforgivable things. Full stop. Worse than any of the people that Mark already has taken issue with in terms of their GDA involvement. But Mark is going to have to accept Nolan's help in protecting Earth if they want to stand any chance. Not to mention that Earth itself will likely have to accept Nolan's help if they want to survive, despite the chaos and carnage he wrought. I'm pretty eager to see how these interpersonal politics play out, how Nolan will attempt to help, whether that's initially from afar, if he'll return to Earth and actually reveal himself. Maybe he'll do it in disguise, with some kind of new alter ego. It also begs the question, how and why has the Viltrum Empire dwindled so significantly? Does it have to do with the fact that they sent so many Vitrulmites out to the far reaches of the galaxy that they ignored repopulation back home? Have their strict eugenics policies actually prevented them from being able to repopulate? I mean, I guess it's also possible they've just straight up killed each other. Is there a secret weakness that we don't know about? Or does it have something to do with what Immortal was hinting at earlier in the episode?
Have you been sick again? I thought they found a cure for you.
This isn't about me.
Definitely possible that there's some kind of Vitrulmite-specific illness that's been thinning their numbers over centuries. Very eager to see what we learn and how Nolan and Alan approach reconnecting with Mark and Earth. I will say, I think that this is another episode where you can slightly feel those budgets tightening. Not because of the animation quality, but because of the sheer volume of reused clips. The entire Mark/Eve date montage was riddled with clips from season 1 and 2, and then when the Alan the Alien episode started, we genuinely got about 5 to 6 minutes of full-on recap before much new stuff started happening. Don't get me wrong, I think the recap was helpful and I liked seeing it all laid out in context, but 5 to 6 minutes is kind of a crazy amount of time to be mostly reusing old footage. But it was effective at the very least. This season is progressing in a way that I'm very locked in for. We're now halfway through season 3 with 4 more episodes en route, and I definitely intend on continuing to talk about the show week by week. The moral dilemmas and character drama showcased in this show, it's some of my favorite out there. And make sure to check out my breakdown from the premiere 3 episodes, as well as my video I did last year about Mark and Nolan's inverted character trajectories. Also, I want to hear what you think about season 3 of Invincible so far. Are you digging it? What stories are you latching on to? Let me know in the comments, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.
I stay mellow watching Johnny two cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny two cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.